Yale Brothers, episode 92.
I'm gonna live my life wide open. I don't need any more regrets. I'm gonna hang around just hoping, 'cause it's not over yet. Oh no, no. I'm gonna run it down the middle. I'm not about to drop this ball. Not gonna love you just a little. I'm gonna give you my all. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Count me in, sign me up, tell me now, how should I begin? 'Cause I don't wanna live with the thought of what might have been. Well, I'm making up my mind this time, 'cause I don't wanna live with what might have been. I'm gonna give it my best shot. I'm gonna find some inspiration in everything that comes my way. I won't be waiting at the station for the train that got away. Not today, yeah. What might have been is bound to be the greatest source of misery anyone could ever know. Anyone could ever. There's bound to be some tragedy wrapped up in our history, but we gotta let it go. Not gonna live with it, no. Sign me up, tell me now, how should I begin? 'Cause I don't wanna live with the thought of what might have been. Count me in, sign me up, tell me now, how should I begin? 'Cause I don't wanna live with the thought of what might have been. Well, I'm making up my mind this time, and I don't wanna live with what might have been. Yeah. Gonna give it my best shot. Ready all night. Come in, sign me up, tell me now, how should I begin? Oh, what might have been? I don't wanna live with the thought of what might have been. What might have been? Sign me up, tell me now, how should I begin? What might have been? I don't wanna live with the thought of what might have been. Yeah, what might have been?
All right, welcome to episode 92. What you just heard from the Yale Brothers is What Might Have Been.
And that is a beautiful song by my very handsome identical twin, Chris.
Right.
Chris, I love that lyric. I'm going to live my life wide open. I don't need any more regrets. And
yeah, I like What Might Have Been is bound to be the greatest source of misery.
I love it. It seems very appropriate for this podcast on a couple of levels. For instance, if our friend Casey King over at Horry-Georgetown Technical College hadn't gotten sober, there would have been no addiction and recovery lecture series at the school.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah.
That event has helped countless people over the past 17 installments, and now the 18th installment is coming up in February. But I have some news, man.
What's that?
This year will be the last year of the program.
What?
Casey's wrapping things up.
You can't, Casey.
You can't do that, Casey.
Don't leave us, man. No, I'm proud of everything you've done, brother.
Me too, man. That is about
Professor.
Professor. It's about as bittersweet as it gets. I've enjoyed covering Casey over the years, and it's a blessing to count him a friend. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Absolutely.
Too.
We love you, Casey.
And his goal has always stayed consistent: to change the face of recovery and reduce the stigma our society places on those in recovery.
Yeah, right on, Casey. Thanks for everything.
No kidding, man.
Yeah, I'd like to know a little backstory on the series in general, please.
Well, I might be the man to tell you about it. The Addiction and Recovery Lecture Series is known for featuring a who's who of celebrity speakers, including Louis Gossett Jr., Craig T. Nelson, Mackenzie Phillips, Paul Williams, Dr. Drew Pinsky, Everclear's Art Alexakis, and Danny Trejo. And last year, you and I had a blast speaking with Tom Arnold.
Yeah, he was great.
Last year. But as bummed out as I am to hear that the series is coming to an end, it's going out with a bang.
Oh, yeah.
Man, it'll feature 3 speaker events on consecutive Thursdays, including the return of Dr. Kevin McCauley, who I saw last year, who's awesome. He's going to explore the neurobiology of behavioral addictions on February 20th.
Whoa.
And Casey is going to be speaking on February 27th, recapping the major events of the last 18 years, and, of course, sharing his own story of addiction and recovery.
My man.
But first, on February 13th, it's Andrew Zimmern. And you know what? I can't do a better introduction than what he's already got on his website, andrewzimmern.com. Andrew Zimmern is an Emmy-winning and 4-time James Beard Award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, and passionate global citizen. As a creator, executive producer, and host of the Bizarre Foods franchise, Andrew Zimmern's Driven by Food, MSNBC's What's Eating America, the Emmy-nominated Family Dinner, Outdoor Channel's Wild Game Kitchen and the newer Field to Fire, and the Emmy-winning The Zimmern List, he has devoted his life to exploring and promoting cultural acceptance, tolerance, understanding through food. We look forward to catching him at this last installment of the series. He'll be presenting, telling his story, and we're excited to have him with us today. Welcome, Chef Andrew Zimmern.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure. We're excited to see you coming to Myrtle Beach for the Addiction and Recovery Lecture Series. Final installment. I see Casey's ending everything with a bang. That's February 13th at Horry-Georgetown Technical College. Have you ever spent time in Myrtle?
I have. It's been more of drive-through. One of the most enjoyable parts about making so much domestic television over the course of the last 20 plus years is that, a lot of times you're in a van driving all over the place. And my uncle lived for a time in Myrtle Beach. So it's a place that I'm not unfamiliar with, but I'm also not familiar with. I'm also the person I've spent about 45 weeks in country in China, spread out over about 20 trips, nothing less than 2 weeks. I've never seen the Great Wall. So it's one of those things like you go, you do your thing, and then who knows?
It's classic being on tour type of thing, I guess, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Oh my gosh. Any idea what you're going to be covering when you make your presentation? You're going to go off the cuff? You're going to be scripted?
Well, I tend to speak spontaneously, which a lot of people hear that and they're like, well, that's the kiss of death. But I do so much speaking on this topic. Of course, I do feel the need whenever I'm talking to a group about this subject in specific to qualify why I'm standing there talking in front of people. Right. So that is, I'll spend a little bit talking about my own personal journey, trying to focus on what I'm doing now about, mental health issues, in the world, which is quite a bit. I get the opportunity to serve on a lot of boards around the country, and I hope affect outcomes positively for a lot of people when it comes to mental health choices and when it comes to surviving, drug and alcohol abuse and suicide, homelessness and hunger, which tend to be my areas of focus, having experienced all of those firsthand. But I also am most interested in having a conversation with the audience. I think that people are really curious. I think they are eager to talk about issues that they have themselves, however they couch them. It might be personal. It may be, exaggerating here, the asking for a friend topic. But I think that having a conversation with the audience there is the thing that I'm most excited about. I've heard all of my shit, for way too long. I'm interested in talking to people about what they want to talk about. And obviously I have a lot of expertise in things, whether that's building internal resiliency programs, whether that's starting out on a recovery journey, whether that's being of service, which is the thing that really saved my life. And we'll see what happens.
You've got so much going on. If we spent all the time enumerating your accomplishments, we'd run out of time. So everyone, if anything you need to know about Chef Andrew Zimmern, go to www.andrewzimmern.com. Chef, when did you first decide you wanted to become a chef? Is it true that you began your culinary training at 14?
Well, I like to say that I began my culinary training when I was about 3 in my mother's kitchen and about 5 in my grandmother's kitchen. I certainly learned a lot then, and I actually still cook some of those dishes. And I think it influenced me tremendously. I had my first paying job in a restaurant at age 14. I worked summers at a restaurant called The Quiet Clam in East Hampton, Long Island. And that was, that got me hooked on restaurants. I already was in love with restaurants. I'd spent a lot of time in restaurants. My parents were restaurant people, which was rare for the 60s and 70s because restaurants weren't the thing. You didn't spend a lot of time. The country was different then. How you spent social time was different then. The quality and quantity of restaurants was different then. And so, I did love restaurants. I did love cooking. The hook really got set deep when I started working at the Quiet Clam, and it never stopped. And I've worked basically, except for a year and a half of homelessness, a year of homelessness, and the half year that preceded it, I've taken a restaurant paycheck ever since. So next year will be the 50th anniversary of me working in restaurants, which is a strange thing to think about.
That's quite a career, man.
Good God.
Yeah.
We're men of a certain age. We're 61, two of us.
Yeah, I'm a couple years older than you guys.
Okay. A look at your bio reveals that you jumped into culinary life in earnest after attending Vassar and then cooking in New York City for notable chefs and restaurateurs. I see the name Thomas Keller, and I think the French Laundry, and a little bit about Anne Rosenzweig, a.k.a. the Greta Garbo of the food world. God. And then you helped open, your bio says, you helped open and run multiple restaurants. Give us a little bit about those early days of promise.
Well, I was also leading a double life at the time. I got out of it. I took the long-term 5-year approach to college. I had asked to take 2 different semesters off, both preceded summers. So I would go away to Europe and Asia, and I would cook professionally and kept learning a lot. Came back to college and graduated with a degree in history and art history. And that was wonderful. Came back to New York and started working in restaurants immediately. I had an extremely high proficiency when it came to cooking. I had a lot of talent. and that served me very well. At the same time, it also didn't serve me very well. When you are, the talented guy, but you're also a drug addict and an alcoholic, and you're active in your addiction, and you're an absolute, amoral scumbag of a human being, a user of people and a taker of things, you tend to try to coast, and get away with doing as little as possible and relying on your ability to improvise and your ability to do things at the last minute to bolster this idea in your head that you're special. None of those things were really true in terms of the positive, except that I did have a lot of talent on the culinary side, and that saved me. When I was in New York, I wanted to work for a lot of different chefs. I wound up working for a while with Rosenzweig at Arcadia. I wound up working at a restaurant called Rakel that was a partnership between Serge, Raoul, and Thomas Keller before he moved out to California and Yountville to open up the French Laundry. I worked at some great restaurants in New York, La Colonna, very fancy Italian restaurant, which I was able to be very successful in because I just come back from working in Venice, Italy for a couple of Michelin restaurants. So, being the American kid in an all Italian kitchen was something that I was able to survive. New York sort of transitioned when I arrived from smaller restaurants to these big, what at the time were called grand cafes. The French would call them brasseries, although a lot of them were not French. They were 150, 175 seats. Restaurateurs realized that with prices being what they are and turnovers being what they were, that if they had a popular place, why have 100 seats? If you could serve 175 people, you could take advantage of your really busy nights. And so, Petaluma fell into that category. A lot of other restaurants that, would be meaningless by name to people would fit into that category as well. La Colonna was one of those restaurants, an Italian restaurant that was, a warehouse environment in lower Manhattan in the West 20s, not all the way west, not to Chelsea. So what was required then were culinarians that produce quality with speed. That was not necessarily the European model, and it was new in America. And so, we had places historically, and I'll just speak about New York, that were big, but they were not high on quality. And we had other places that were small and very high on quality. And what happened in the 80s was they birthed restaurants that required precision, and the food had to be high in quality, but big in numbers, which is a staggering challenge in the restaurant industry. And, I flourished in those places because they were very, very, very high pressure environments. I did well then. And then I would go out at night and, party all night, come into work the next day, lather, rinse, repeat, grab some sleep on night number 2, crush it on nights 3 and 4, and then eventually just, disappear for 2 days on my days off if I had them. And, at this time, I'm an active, very active addict and alcoholic, going out at night to, dangerous places to gamble and to do drugs and to live the life that I thought was going to be my sole existence. I didn't see a lot of opportunities to do things other than what I was doing. I was going to cook like crazy, be successful in the restaurant business, outside of it, live fast, die young. And I wound up doing some really great work in the restaurant business. At the same time, relationships started to disappear, money problems, all kinds of issues began to plague me that went from being amusing or of concern to friends to being toxic in all my relationships. So eventually, by the time, the 80s were done, I was a person that nobody wanted to be around. Wow. I was essentially unemployable. Drugs and alcohol were driving every decision that I made. When that happens, you don't have room for people. You don't have room for work. You don't have room for any of the things that life is really made of. All you have room for are your chemicals. I started to slide off the radar screen of life. Eventually, going homeless basically for all of 1991. I think it was Christmas 1990, December, right after Christmas.
You're like 30. Were you like 30?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was drinking. I was living over on the west side. Far west side in the 40s, in this giant glass tower that had brand new apartments that I scammed my father into helping me get an apartment there, and crazy behavior that I can't explain at all. I had developed these drinking buddies in these shot and beer bars, one in particular that I frequented behind Penn Station, and the sheriff of New York came and evicted me from my apartment. I was allowed, they seized everything, threw it in a truck, told me I had 30 days to collect it. I grabbed my duffel bag full of clothes. You were allowed to carry what you could out. I stuffed a bunch of clothes that were on my floor into a duffel bag, walked down to the shot and beer bar, and there was this guy, AJ, this toothless old alcoholic who sort of was the big shot there.
Yeah.
And he asked me about what the bag was for. I said, I just gotten evicted. He said, well, if I needed a place to live, they were crashed. These people were, had a abandoned building that they were living in down on Sullivan Street in Lower Manhattan. And that's where I went. And I lived there for a year, sleeping on a dirty pile of clothing that I would sprinkle Ajax or Comet Cleanser around before I passed out so the rats and roaches wouldn't crawl over me. I stole to afford money for my booze and my food, and eventually checked into a really glamorous hotel called the San Pedro in Manhattan. They charge by the hour. I think I slid $100 bill across the counter to the gentleman. When I say counter, I mean one of those little bank teller things that had a little silver tunnel that you could put money underneath, and an inch and a half of bulletproof plastic that he had behind. And went upstairs and ate a fistful of barbiturates and started to just drink bottles of vodka, trying to kill myself, and woke up 2 days later, wasn't dead. Called a friend for help, which was the first time in my life I had ever used the words, I don't know how to do blank. Can you help me? I had never used those words before. And when I did, amazing things came to pass. And I was on the road to recovery. I think that despite the fact that I continued to drink and steal for the next couple of days and abuse the relationships that I had with people who had tried to help me and were helping me, it was that statement that allowed me to walk 2 days later into my intervention, not my first, and just say, what time's my plane? Got on a plane, one-way ticket to Minnesota. That was the night of January 28th, 1992, and started my current sobriety, and it'll be 33 years this coming January.
You've already covered the question I was going to ask about the whole intervention thing? Did you have any resentments of the people who were there? But since it wasn't your first, you were ready and you just said, when's your flight? When's my flight?
Yeah. I mean, there was no, I mean, it was interesting. There were a lot of people who weren't there. My parents wouldn't attend because they had already mourned my death. They did not, I had disappeared. So they were done. The woman who I wanted to marry, who I had, I guess the contemporary term would be ghosted the year beforehand, and said, "Hey babe, I'll, be at your house for Thanksgiving. I'll be on the train, pick me up at Union Station in DC at 5:00. She was not there.
Oh man.
But a lot of close friends were, and I was ready. I mean, there was no fight left in me. I really didn't have a choice either. I just said, that's it. I'm done.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Thank you for sharing that, Chef. Now, you were 30-ish when all this went down. You had already achieved levels of success to that point. But then, is it fair to say that the de facto floodgates opened fully after you achieved sobriety?
Yeah. And, I think there's a big difference between, cleaning up, drying out, and getting sober. There was, I was bereft in treatment because I felt just like everything else in life. I thought everyone had the keys to the kingdom, and I wasn't going to get the things that were in the literature and the things that people were talking about, in groups, outside speakers were talking about from the stage, in the auditorium where you went every night at treatment to hear a different speaker. I heard what was required to be happy and sober. And I thought that was the stuff that everyone else would get and not me. Wow. I didn't think I was capable of having a relationship with a power greater than myself. And what I had heard and what I read in the literature and from other people was that, a lot of things you could do that were unique to your own recovery. But the one thing everyone had in common was that they had found a power greater than themselves that would, not only restore them to sanity, but provide them with an abiding faith that would allow them to walk through the rest of their lives and match serenity to the calamities that came. Wow. So I was convinced there's I'm not getting that. And about 10 days into my experience at Hazelden, I, got that gift from someone else. Actually from two other people, both of whom sadly are dead, tragically. Oh. But I got that gift. And someone pointed out to me that there was a promise in the 12th step of the group that I attend that was not so much hidden as misunderstood. I think it's still misunderstood today. We read the literature and it says that, a lot of people have a white light spiritual experience that allows them to make an instantaneous change in their lives. Others are able to have a series of experiences that, while not a white light experience, change the way they think inwardly and act outwardly. I did not see the first words in the 12th step that were having had, past tense, a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, ... And the step itself is talking about service work, right? And it's often confused to be only about service work. But there is a very powerful promise in that first piece of that first sentence at the top of that step. And I started to talk to people about that, or it was talked to me about that I shouldn't be bereft, that there was a rote way of actually just walking through the work itself, that I would have a spiritual experience if I went through those steps. And that challenged an idea that I had mentioned earlier, which was, that I could coast through everything. There's no coasting through that work, right? You either do it or you don't. And, we have to do things like be rigorously honest with other human beings, and we have to confront our past, and we have to make amends. We have to do all these things that seem so overwhelming. But for me, not going back into that disgusting hellhole that I crawled out of physically, emotionally, spiritually, I found myself willing to do that work. When I found myself unable to do that work during the first 3 years of my recovery journey, it was impressed upon me by a bunch of old timers that service work would take me out of myself and would save the day. And they were right. It did. And I was able, by the time I was, 2 years sober, to have enough emotional sobriety, enough physical sobriety to be very successful again at work, to begin to have relationships with other human beings. By 3 years, I was well on my way to enjoying success again in my field. And it was a real miracle for me. Even more so, probably, was the ability that was given to me, by a different group of men doing, group activities with these guys. They hang out with your cronies, got to replace the booze with something else, blah, blah, blah. Started hanging out with a group of guys who said that I might want to, it's actually a very funny story. We were at a step workshop weekend, and there were a bunch of folks in there with, real serious long-term sobriety, 40 years plus. And, I'm somewhere around 2.5 to 3.5 years sober. And, of course, each person was assigned a step to talk about as we sort of went through this weekend. And I got to talk about the 10th step. And so I started talking about my conception of the 10th step. And after the meeting, and a whole bunch of people were like, "Oh, that's great." After the meeting, an old timer put me over the hood of a car with his long pointy finger and told me that I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about.
Oh boy.
And he suggested that I go and read the bottom of page 84. This is in the 3rd edition of the book that my 12-step group reads. And I read that page, and I came back to him and I said, I don't get it. And he pointed out to me that at the bottom of page 84, it gives very complete instructions about step 10. I confused step 10 at the time with step 11, that they were sort of a combo platter. And he pointed out to me that that's not the case at all. And it essentially says, when you're angry, resentful, jealous, afraid, there's 4 things that you should do. You should tell another person immediately. You should say a prayer. You should make amends if necessary. And then you should be of service to others. Why? Because love and tolerance is our code. And it then says, I think in the paragraph after, this is a practice that can continue for our lifetime and that you can begin it right away. You don't have to wait to do this. And this guy said to me, that is the recipe for daily living. He said, when you work these steps and you go 1 through 9, they're very tactical, and, every newcomer should approach them in that order and work those steps with a mentor, which in many 12-step groups we call a sponsor. And we move through those steps. And then 10, 11, 12 are oftentimes, called, the living steps. This is how we then run our life moving forward. And I sort of had skipped step 10. I just went right into this idea of prayer, meditation in step 11 and service work, which is the second half of step 12. And this gentleman said, oh, no, 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 no. He said, way more important is step 10. That's how you deal through life on a daily basis on life's terms. And I found myself, he asked me to really practice this. So whenever I found myself angry, resentful, jealous, afraid, etc., I would do those 4 things. And my sponsor pointed out to me that it doesn't say do service work for another alcoholic.
Oh, okay.
There's 100 other places in the book where it does. However, there it doesn't. It just says do something for another human being.
So it's conspicuously,
I like it.
Conspicuously absent, that phrase in that part.
Do something for another human being.
Nice.
And he said, that's anyone. And so I started to export this idea of service out into the rest of my life. I started to do things for other people in a way that I hadn't before. And it became the defining element of the last 30 years of my life. And, the idea that doing things for other people is the thing that will give the doer, the giver, everything they need. In other words, when you give, you get more in return is sort of an old spiritual axiom,
sure.
Right? I mean,
given, it'll be given to you.
Everyone talks about that when you're 3, 4, 5 years old. I conveniently ignored all that advice. And then to be given a second go round on that was really something. To have it then really save my life was a gift that I can't even ever begin to pay back or ever begin to understand how I've been given it. But you honor it by, I think, talking about it and by doing the service work itself.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable until you put it into action, I suppose. That's kind of what I'm hearing. It's like,
yeah, I mean, like everything else in life, what did Phil Knight say? Nike, just do it.
Right.
I mean, we all learn at some point how to navigate life. It's told to us. Oftentimes the telling doesn't do the work. One has to experience tragedy and setback and, see negative impacts on life from one kind of behavior in order to embrace another kind of behavior.
Yep.
And I think that's the key. I wound up very niftily in a place that allowed me to practice all these things and put them into a way of living that worked for me.
Yeah, man, that's wonderful.
Well spoken, Chef. And this also then would continue with your work for mental health awareness in that CCAP. Am I getting that right? In the CCAP video?
Well, yeah. I mean, the CCAP is a training ground for chefs. They asked me to give a little talk about mental health and the issues around it, and I have. I've been doing it my whole life. I find it indistinguishable, and I'm not saying that I was onto this early, although by accident I was onto this early. having, being a drug addict, being an alcoholic, having experiences with anxiety and depression, being a suicide survivor gives you the currency to talk to anyone about those issues. And I found them inseparable from the rest of my life. And that included my work life. So before it became the current way in which we talk about human beings caring for one another.
Yes.
Over the last decade, it became popular. And there's 1,000 versions of it, but it's essentially put on your own oxygen mask first before you help someone else, right?
Yes.
But as soon as you put your own mask on, you better fucking help someone else. And to be caring about other people within your work environment became the first place to sort of put that into action. In the restaurant and related industries, we happen to have unusually larger percentage versus the greater population outside of those environments who have mental health issues. So it became a really simple and easy place for me to work because my feet were already in those businesses.
Amen.
Right.
But
yeah.
I'm sure imparting that to I'm assuming young people, that was kind of a blessing to me. You were talking about also being of service was a big component of that, what I saw, but you also had things like use I statements instead of you statements and things like that. Look, there's some blocking in time. Once someone says, well, how the hell do I do that? Mm-hmm. Right. Then there becomes like, here's what you can do with your language. Here's what you can do with how to connect to other people. Here's how you can actually be empathetic. Empathy is a word that gets tossed around a lot, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes. These days.
And when I first heard it, I was like, well, first of all, what the hell does it mean? I mean, most people hear it and they don't actually say to themselves, I don't know what that means. And I find that most people don't know what that means. The fact of the matter is that if you want to be empathetic to other human beings, if you want to connect with other human beings, you can't be the person that tells people how to do things, right? The person who tells folks how to do things right out of the gate is the person who's instantly not listened to. I always ask people if they've ever watched the TV show Survivor. I mean, there's 48 seasons of it out. I think most people have seen it, or a similar game like it. And the person on day one on Survivor, when they're building their little lean-tos and getting their fire pit going and figuring all that out, is always the person who, quote, has the biggest target on their back, or becomes the asshole who's voted out in episode 2 or 3.
Yeah, we're tuning this guy out, right? Yeah.
One or the other, right?
Yeah.
It's also extremely unpleasant, right? To disenfranchise other people around you, to not be listening. So people always, want to know, well, how do I put these things into practice? I find the easiest thing is to talk about this idea of co-regulating with people before you operationalize. If you tell me, you guys walk into my house and, say, the dog just ran away, the car doesn't work, I got fired, the love of my life just walked out the door. And I immediately tell you, well, did you call the police and report the dog missing? And, have you called the garage about the car? And you should call the girl and tell her X, Y, or boy and tell her X, Y, or Z. You're just an asshole.
You mean you need to do this and this?
But if the first words out of your mouth are, oh my God, that sounds horrible, let me get you a glass of water, sit down. And then we sit down and I say, tell me what happened. That sounds awful. And I actually listen. The result of that is co-regulation. We are then co-regulated emotionally. I am listening to you. You're able to, by talking about it, its power over you decreases a little bit.
Yes, sir.
You calm down. And then once we are co-regulated, you're probably going to say something like, I never liked him or her, and the car was on its last legs, and I know I'm going to get another job tomorrow, but man, I love that dog. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And then you get to say something like, hey, are you interested in hearing a couple ideas? Ask that question. And then you can, or maybe it's, maybe you're concerned about all of them. It's, the idea is we can't just walk in and start operationalizing with people. We have to co-regulate with people. We have to find a place to connect with them before we can tell anyone what to do. Now, many people confuse sharing their experience, strength, and hope with telling people what to do. And by that, I mean, there is a big difference between my dog ran away once, I have some ideas for you, or I just suffered a breakup last year. It wound up being okay. Do you want me to tell you about it? There's a big difference between that and telling someone, well, here's what you do, go, call 911, report the dog missing, chase after the lover, tell them X, Y, or Z. There's such a huge difference between those two approaches. And nobody wants to hear someone tell you what to do when they haven't co-regulated with you.
It makes perfect sense, man.
Amen. And I'm sure as in the culinary industry and in the media business, as you're all over the place, you probably see a lot of that going on. I could see cooks getting berated without people understanding, like being berated by the boss, or production companies doing the same thing to people all the time. Unacceptable behaviors
in many more formal workplaces are acceptable, or have been for many years, acceptable behaviors in less formal workplaces. I found it to be anywhere there's some sort of artistic thing. I mean,
like rock and roll or something.
I was about to say the music business, bands. I mean, right. I mean, you hear all these stories, but yeah, I mean, it's, I wound up in two industries, the food business and the TV business, that have non-traditional structures when it comes to work, and a lot of unacceptable behavior was tolerated. And so it became the perfect place to sort of work through all this stuff and figure it out.
Oh, I can only imagine, man.
Chef, there was so much more to say. You have been very gracious with your time. Is there anything on your heart of hearts you'd like to add, perhaps for someone who's still struggling, or anything on your heart of hearts that you'd like to get out there in Myrtle Beach?
Well, I'll tell you one thing about my own life. Things look really good on the outside. Every human being goes through the same shit. Life is still fired at us at point blank range. Relationships end, relationships start, dogs run away, jobs get lost. You're having the best day of your life, and you pull into the driveway and tragedy is on the other side of the front door, in one manner of speaking or another. So we're constantly challenged by this. Everyone is still a work in progress. Some of us have just had the opportunity to practice solutions to these things more often than others. And I think it's really important that I let people know that I am still very much a work in progress. That's number one. I think the second thing is, and I'm asked this all the time, in person, in social media, people come into my DMs and like, I'm at the end of the rope. What do I do? And the very first thing that I tell people all the time is you just have to call one person and tell them everything that's going on right now. The minute you start to talk about it with another human being, you give yourself a chance. The second thing that I tell people is that for those of us with mental health issues, with isms, whether it's gambling, food, alcohol, drugs, other behavioral issues, right? Anyone who has an ism, it tends to be a very self-centered lifestyle when you're in your ism. And so I know that one of the things that we all have in common, regardless of what your ism is that we don't ever use the phrase, I don't know how to do blank, can you help me? Human beings are hardwired to help other people. We're hardwired that way. We want to help other human beings. We have an incredible resource for empathy buried deep inside us. For many people, it's just untapped, right? Other people are just givers, and they do things for other people. And that's just the way they've been raised, or a natural pipeline into that space that others don't have. So I tell anyone, talk to another human being, and by all means, let whoever you're talking to know that you don't know how to do X. Can they help you? Asking for help is a sign of strength. It is not a sign of weakness. And if you want to enroll someone else, none of us can do it alone. If I gave the two of you all of the problems currently sitting on my desk right now, and I have many to solve, if I gave you my problems and said, can you spend 25 minutes and just tell me what the next step is with each one? You'd be like, sure. And you would literally just be like, oh, do this for that, do this for that. I mean, we never can do that for ourselves. It's so easy to see it in other people. It's almost like looking at a crossword puzzle and saying, you couldn't get that word?
Yeah.
I mean,
Perspective.
It exactly. And so consequently, I think enrolling other people in our lives and doing it by asking for help is probably the first step, not making a pun here, in beginning that journey of getting well. For those that are, I think, what is it? 988 is the suicide awareness hotline.
I'll make sure we add that in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it's 988, the National Suicide Awareness Hotline number. That is, anyone who's struggling with suicidal ideation or self-harm should be calling that. Anybody who is struggling with drug and alcohol problems, a simple call to a place like Alcoholics Anonymous, a simple call, a simple Google search on your phone brings up 100 different resources in every place that you live. Those are people, fascinatingly, who have made it their lives to help other people.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I never talked to my teachers, for example, about the problems that were going on in my life. I found that probably even, as outrageous, but even less understandable than talking to my own parents. I had built up resentments and anger, and there was all kinds of other emotional garbage between my parents and I by the time I was 13, 14, 15 years old.
Sure, yeah.
Teachers had done nothing to me. As I say to people all the time, teachers literally pick the lowest paying job that you could possibly imagine, whose only goal is to enrich the lives of young people under their tutelage. Period.
Yeah.
Full stop. They have devoted their life to helping young people. And I'm going to keep a secret from those folks.
Yeah.
If there's that, to me, is as great a definition of the insanity that I was experiencing at the time as a young teen. And so I encourage people all the time to seek out those folks for whom it is their lifestyle to want to be of service. And those are all the people at the other end of those hotlines, right?
Yeah.
Those are those people who work in treatment centers. Those are those people who work in mental health outreach and neighborhood community centers where you can just walk in. We have them everywhere. Help is available to everyone who seeks it. And to those who genuinely seek it, great outcomes typically are the result of taking that very first step.
I love it. I love it.
Chef, it's a joy to look at you and to share this with you. That's I have to say,
very well said.
Yes,
sir.
I was intimidated.
Pleasure.
I was intimidated before I saw your face, and you got this energy that put me at ease, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Addiction and Recovery lecture series, a final installment in Myrtle, and Again, I'm Roger. This is my twin brother, Chris.
Nice to meet you, Chef. Talk about finishing this series with a bang. What a pleasure, sir. What a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
I'll see you. I'll see you guys in February.
Sounds good, brother. We'll look forward to saying hello, giving you a hug.
Absolutely.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Take
Chef.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Oh, man, we got so excited talking to Chef.
Yeah.
We forgot to do our outro, so we're at on break at a gig right now.
Yeah, this is cool. This is a cool way to do it. I had so much fun talking to Chef, and I'm glad he was very gracious. And now we're on break at Lulu's.
Yeah, so we just wanted to say, if you want to get in touch with us, feel free to drop us a line at yalebrothers@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can still find us on that boomer platform, Facebook, as the Yale Brothers.
Oh, is that what that is?
And thank you again, Chef Andrew Zimmern.
Rock and roll.